Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Doug Mennin, Professor of Clinical Psychology and Director of the Reed Lab at Teachers College. And I'm joined today by TC alumna Dr. Dale Atkins, who's a renowned relationship expert and licensed psychologist. Today we are honored to be speaking with you as part of the Academic Festival 2020. Dale and I will be engaging in a candid discussion on coping with anxiety and depression, especially during a pandemic. And we'll be answering some of the questions you submitted in advance. And also, we welcome your participation in the conversation, which you can do by using the chat feature on your screen. Well, here's the understatement of the year. Living through a pandemic is stressful. And we know that fear and anxiety about a new disease and what could happen can be overwhelming and cause strong emotions in adults and children. Public health actions such as social distancing, while necessary to flatten the curve, can make people feel isolated and lonely. It can increase stress and anxiety. Coping with these emotions in a healthy way will make you, the people you care about, and your community stronger. So I'm excited today to be here with Dale to get a chance to talk about these pressing issues that are affecting us all. We know that we've all been impacted by this experience, and it's produced many different types of emotional responses that we'll be talking about. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our experiences and the work we've done, and I want to hear from Dale first about some of the things that she's been working on. So maybe I'll start there and say, hi, Dale, how's it going?
Hi, Doug. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm really happy that we're doing this together and can share some of what we've both learned and continue to learn since this became so much a part of our life landscape several months ago. And, as we enter the fall, the understatement of the year that you said before is something that we never thought we'd be sitting here doing this kind of thing as fall would approach. And the work that I've been doing, and thank you for asking, has evolved since the very beginning, when I was mostly focusing on working with just the general audience, people in their everyday lives, of how they were going to adapt to so many different things that were suddenly thrust upon them and created, just because of what they were, a significant fear and anxiety and living in uncertainty and questioning whether they were going to actually be well or not well. And then in the early days, we had so many people getting sick and we didn't quite know what to do, and wearing a mask and all of these things, and families living together, intergenerational people living in small spaces, and what was happening with jobs. There just seemed to be a never-ending array of, quote, assaults. And they added to stress. Some of us have better ways of dealing with stress than others, but all of us thought that this would be a time-sensitive kind of experience. And I think that really focusing on resilience during this time and what that means in the long term as we are going through. So that's been the focus of much of my work with different communities. Of late, I've been working a lot with people in the education world. Not surprising, since Teachers College is so much of my background, but really working with administrators and school systems and teachers as they prepare to get back into the classroom, whether it's remote or in person, and parents, and how parents are dealing with the feeling of working at home while their kids are working at home, or sending their kids to school when they may or may not feel comfortable. So that's kind of how I've been, keeping my own work engaged, as well as working with patients. Initially, when I was working with patients, I felt that my, quote, therapy sessions were more like crisis counseling. And I believe that's still true in many cases. And sometimes I find that when I'm working with a group of people, it really is that kind of keeping our finger on our own pulse, seeing how we can integrate healthy ways of dealing with things over which we have no or very little control, and trying to maintain, if we can, an optimistic attitude and bringing kindness and hope into our everyday life. So that's what I've been up to. And I know the Reed Lab has been really front and center, not just because of your past research, but also, here you have this incredible petri dish of a world that has unbelievable anxiety, depression. And so I'm actually very eager to hear what you have to say now. So thanks for that opportunity to introduce.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's great to hear all that you've been involved in, and I'm going to want to ask so much more, particularly around the school return. I know we should come back to that. I know that's impacting so many families and parents and children right now in terms of how to do that and do that right. I know, and it's so varied as an experience. So let's definitely come back to that. I would like to hear more about it. And thank you for asking. In our work, we both treat and research stress and anxiety and depression, which we were in the middle of as all this began. We often look at not just seeing how we can improve treatment, but how we can understand how treatment works, and understanding do treatments work for the reasons we say they work. So if we're training people and teaching them skills, is that what actually changes in their experience, brain and body, and do those changes account for why they get better? So a lot of our work was examining that, and we do some of that with neuroimaging and looking at people's brains in response to different actions they're taking related to the skills that we're training. And as we were in the middle of that when this happened, we had to put that to the side. Obviously, we were all hunkering down, and our team really asked, how can we be most helpful in the New York area? At that time, New York was disproportionately being affected more, and as you know, the experience was difficult for many New Yorkers, both in the New York City area, but also across the state and in the tri-state area. So we were interested in what can we do to reach out to those in need, especially those that were particularly affected. Those who were essential workers, frontline healthcare workers, older adults, those from communities that, as we'll talk more about, have disproportionately gotten less attention for health and have experienced strong health disparities. So how could we reach out to and just individuals who had a stronger emotional response to this? As you mentioned, just maybe you felt a little stressed at times, got anxious, but when this happened, this sort of created a different experience, an experience of not being sure about, with the ambiguity, when to go out, how to touch things in the beginning, all those issues. So we wanted to reach out to individuals that really just were changed by this experience. So we were looking for people who were distressed, that were worrying and ruminating, and particularly had COVID-related distress, emotionally or impacting in some way. Many people lost their jobs, their livelihoods, had to relocate. So looking for those types of distress and suffering, and we developed. We have a treatment we call emotion regulation therapy. That's based in modern behavioral approaches, but also integrates other types of experiential techniques to map onto what we know about how emotions are processed in the brain. And so it's a modern approach based in science, but we've been utilizing it effectively in a shorter form for caregivers of those with cancer. And so we thought we'd take that model and see if we can help the people struggling with COVID. And we developed a video therapy that is 8 sessions and twice a week. The therapy is free. And we also worked hard. My team, I really have to give a shout out to my team, who are fantastic students who put together a web app to go along with it. So we really, with the people who have come through the group, we've treated 50 people so far. And it's been it's been a helpful resource. People come every week. People, we haven't had drops. People are interested, and the web app helps them be able to utilize it during the week, and also after therapy's over. So after those 8 sessions, they can still use the web app and learn some of the skills. And we'll talk more about some of those skills that are being used. And to sort of address a lot of the problems that we'll discuss. So that's a little bit about what we've been up to as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned it, because I think that, the whole role of caregivers, and early on, I was doing work with caregivers of people who have dementia, and so many of the support programs that had been in place for caregivers of any type of illness or ongoing cognitive decline in particular were just all of a sudden gone. And that was also true in other mental health centers, where people just couldn't get access to the help that they were used to, that they relied on, and that their caregivers relied on. So, as is often the case, it was the caregivers, and still is, who really were carrying the burden and needed to have their own techniques for dealing with their issues related to COVID. Many of them are older, so they were already in a precarious position as far as at risk, and just again, the change of routine and not being able to have a routine that might be a healthy routine, and being in the same place with the same person over and over, not having support, I think is something that we used also as a model, as you say, and generalized to the larger population. So I'm really glad you mentioned the role of caregiver. Also, so many parents who are home, who are normally caregivers, but also relied on school to be helping them be caregivers or babysitters or grandparents, were then full-time caregivers as well as full-time workers outside of their home, but now it was in their home. And it just made it a lot more complicated. And I think, to your point, of people who felt anxious, could handle their anxiety, felt that they were kind of losing it. And that then affected their whole self-image and their self-confidence, and wondered how they could still be the rock if they had been the rock. And I think that these subtle pieces of our personal puzzles and our personal mosaics sometimes really affected our own sense of ourselves in how we were going to get through this, and how we were going to be role models, and who were our role models. So thank you for mentioning the caregiver.
Absolutely. Actually, I think what you're speaking of, and I know you've talked about this before, is a sense of resilience. How does someone who's responsible for others maintain resilience? And we saw caregivers, other parents, or those who have loved ones who were sick with COVID and they had very little contact with them. How do they find the resilience to do those things that maybe they would have those resources for before? And we had right, and many individuals who now had children at home and a partner or a loved one who was normally helping, now not, and having to deal with the everyday stress of schooling and of just the emotional responses. Of course, if a loved one is sick and away for a long period of time, handling media and what children might see, and a sense of how does one become resilient in that. And we know that there's a lot of variation in resilience, in the sense that some people were naturally resilient for different reasons, and some that's harder. But I wanted to just sort of bring that topic up, because I think that's often a question of how do I what's the right way to be responding to this, and there's what we know is there are a lot of differences and a lot of variations that work.
There are, and there's a mixture, I think, at different times. And, certainly the people who are influencing you have a lot to do with it. But I think one of the most basic aspects has to do with how flexible we are, and whether or not we can challenge what we thought was true, and what was true about ourselves and also a situation, and how adaptable are we, and what are we willing to learn, and how are we willing to change. Because certainly everything is changing, and once we get our bearings, it changes again. So it's a continuity of adapting, and some of us do that a little better than others, and some of us do it a whole lot better than others. And so I think that that's a component. I think another component is how kind we are to ourselves, and the whole area of self-care, empathy for ourselves, kindness to ourselves, so that as we're trying something new and we fall on our face, the voice in our head is not that critical, shameful voice, but hey, you never did this before, and let's keep trying, and let's, kind of like what I like to call your personal cheerleader, or that person in your life who was always there for you, kind of resurrect them and keep them loud and clear so that your internal voice is one of encouragement instead of such critical judgment. And I think that's really important. And when we find that we can be that for others and have compassion for others around us, kind of like, what would you say to a kid who's really frightened or really just in an area that is so over his or her head? How would you comfort them? I ask people to use that same voice and that tone and that same body language for themselves. And also to try and find joy in whatever is going on. It's so easy to feel that this is doom and gloom. And in fact, at times it absolutely is. So recognize the loss, recognize what is no longer that which we relied on. The hugs. And I always talk about conversational hugs, that you can't hug the people that you really are close to and want to. But what about the quality of the conversation that you have with them? Is it just checking in, or are you really connecting and trying to be listening in a different way and present in a different way while you are absent? So I think that's important. The other thing, and I mentioned learning, it's learning about yourself and learning about the situation, learning about COVID, learning about how to teach your kids without having to be a graduate of teachers college with a degree and with a degree in teaching. But can everything you're doing be really good enough? And given everything that you're doing? So I think resilience also takes in understanding what it is each of us needs to be able to restore ourselves, our physical body. Are we sleeping enough? Are we exercising? What are we eating? How are we monitoring kind of like our online behavior? It's very easy to get sucked into social media. It's very easy to get into watching the news at times that are the worst time to watch the news, as soon as you get up and as soon as you go to bed. And having like a pre-sleep ritual, doing things that really help you to be safe, to savor the moments, to take care of yourself, and to inquire about things that you may not know. And you don't have to be, the master. All you need to do is be one step ahead of learning something and truly understanding that there's so much we cannot control. What can we control, and how we can take small steps in improving our day-to-day life. And I guess for me, one of the most important tips that I can offer is to try and stay in the present as much as you can, and to not really go follow the what if, or, oh my God, this is going to happen, and then that trail continues. Recognize that that's a possibility. Recognize that it's your thought, and then try and contain it and say, what can I do now to really lasso it in? I think that with resilience, we often look back and see, oh boy, I was really traumatized and look how I got through it. I think with COVID, we have a series of events and situations where we may have felt safe and now we don't feel safe. Or we didn't feel safe and now we do feel safe. And, I couldn't go to a restaurant, but now I'm kind of going to try and take takeout. Or maybe I'll go sit outside, but then that person coughed. So there's this constant sense of, am I safe? Are my children safe? We can't really keep our finger on the pulse all the time. But I think if we stay as present as we can, and we say, I'm comfortable with this, but I'm not comfortable with that, it's our decision. There's a lot of pressure to behave in ways that we don't feel are consistent with who we are, with the way we want to live our life, with our moral fiber. And I really am advocating for people to really listen to their own voice, to take cues from their body and see when they are uncomfortable. I'm heartened by the increase in the number of people who are signing on and buying apps for mindfulness and training of the mind to be calmer, to take moments where they can kind of steady themselves, their spirit, their body, to be in nature. I'm really encouraged by this. I'm encouraged that people are trying to do this with their children, that companies are encouraging this. Because I think what we're understanding through COVID, and boy, I hope it lasts after COVID, is how much we really can control. within ourselves and our attitude about the situation that we're in. And I think pre-COVID, everybody was running around pretty fast. And I don't think people realized that we all have this capability, and that we can encourage others to be more resilient, that we can listen to them, that we can tell them what we admire about them, how they were role models, how they are role models, which I also think is another aspect of resilience. I will share with you that I consistently call in the memory of my father. My father's been dead for 25 years. He was my biggest cheerleader. And he always said to me, no matter what, I know you can do this. I have confidence in you. You'll find a way. And sometimes, even just repeating that to you brings tears to my eyes. Sometimes, even with a very supportive family, it's my father that I need to listen to. It's my father that I need to call into my life. And I think that that's probably part of my resilient package, is knowing that there had been someone in my life who always believed that I would be able to get through whatever it was. And some of us don't have that person, but we can look in our relationships and see who's there, and when previously did we get through difficult times, and how did we get through them? We may not need the same resources, internal or external, but we know that we mastered something that was difficult. And calling that up and remembering that is really, really helpful, and helps us to build compassion for ourselves and to motivate us to go forward.
That's so many important points in that, Dale. It seems to me that when you're speaking of flexibility, and then the sort of agency that someone has in those times, we're really talking about moments and being able to feel grounded in difficult moments. And I think that sense of choice making is hard in COVID, because there isn't often, we rely on others, on systems to feel anchored, to know, to find our rewards. So we might, generally from just a convention, know what feels safe. We know where to go when something feels rewarding. Maybe go out to dinner or something, and all those are challenged here. We often in the COVID experience can get caught in moments in being flexible because of uncertainty. And so one of those things, though, one of those important points, though, is that personal choice is really important. Personal differences and decision making. There isn't a right answer to how should you respond to this moment, to this uncertainty. So do I go, if I'm feeling that a place may be unsafe, do I go out to eat? Is that right or wrong to feel nervous about that? Do I see friends? Should my children have a play date? We try to take as much information as possible from healthcare experts, and then there's choice making about what makes us feel comfortable, and allowing ourselves to feel some sense of challenge to safety, and then how do we want to challenge ourselves? What feels right? And as you pointed out, a sense of gratification and reward, of what's meaningfully rewarding, and how do I balance those pieces between wanting to feel safe or feel engaged? So we often talk with our clients about how to get better at being clear in that moment, and we call it clarity for action. How do you become clear in a moment of uncertainty that way, and decide how, with more intentionality, how do you want to make that choice? And we know that's not an easy thing generally, and it's particularly hard with the ambiguities in the COVID experience. It's particularly hard if you're experiencing even greater uncertainty, maybe because you're at a career job where you're more exposed to risk, that you've had loss, that you have financial challenges and contextual and community challenges. Those can make it more difficult to sort of place yourself within that moment. But being able to find that clarity, and then, as you mentioned, use your mind that often can try to attack you, as you talked about the sense of self-criticism and the sense of worrying about the future, ruminating about what maybe, feeling like regret that you were supposed to do something different in some way. It would have been different had I, before COVID, changed my job, done this, I would be in a better place. Noticing your mind in those moments, and working to shift that a bit. As you mentioned, mindfulness is an important part of that, and as is compassion. So learning to anchor yourself in things like the breath, and noticing your body, not just when it's hijacking you, but in just through the day. Noticing your environment, noticing your sensorial experiences that are both pleasant and noxious. So maybe, smelling flowers and a subway grate, just to really see what's all around, create an anchor in your body, in your environment, and allowing things to be as they are, and learning how to kind of create a balance between those that pull at us in difficult ways and where we wish we were. And as you mentioned, compassion, adding other relationships to ourselves, beyond those critical minds. And we often have our own percepts of that. I know you work with families and kids, and the movie that always comes to me is Inside Out. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yes, I love Inside Out.
What's that?
I love that movie.
I love it, right? It's a fantastic movie.
Yes.
And I use it with adults, and I think it's a great film. Not so much for showing what emotions are, some emotion theorists have trouble with, but it's emotion representations, how we experience our emotions, what we do with them. We have characters in our mind. We all do. We all create the experience and of those who want to harm us and those who potentially can help us. And and it's natural. And we often know that trying to get rid of a harmful voice is very ineffective. It's sort of like telling someone, whatever you do right now, don't think of a pink elephant,
exactly.
Right? And that just comes up. And so instead, letting them be there, letting that critic be there, but adding, and thank you so much for sharing your experience with your father, and adding people who have mattered to us, what they would say, what we could say to ourselves, imagining ourselves when we were younger, and the times we had crisis then, and what we could say with the knowledge we've gained to ourselves. Imagining a safe, even the sense it could be tactile, maybe it's a pet, or just the love you might get from a pet or a child. So using those in the moment is important, but for the purpose to help gain that clarity to choose actions in an uncertain time. I think that's also a really big part of being resilient, is that ability. Luckily, it can be learned, it can be improved, and we see that people grow and change in that way.
Doug, I'm so grateful that you talked about choosing action. And I think what's really important is to differentiate the type of action you choose. And one of the things that I think really helps us in challenging times is just because we chose actions before, doesn't mean that they're going to work now. In fact, they actually may be harmful. So that creating the new habit may take a lot of effort, and we just may not want to put forth that effort. But when we see the change, when we see how our mood shifts, when we see how our body presents differently, there's really a motivation to do that. So, I'm thinking of people who are on the internet a lot, and they may have a propensity for online shopping or online gambling. Well, that may be, an action that they've taken when they didn't feel so great before, but that action is really not going to be helpful. It's not going to be healthy. So how can we monitor ourselves and say, is this good for me? Is this good for my family? And really kind of step out, and without major judgment that you're going to feel shamed, really talk about, what else might I choose to do that can help me move forward through this very frightening time? How can I deal with what's going on? How can I face it? See what the reality is, and then incorporate healthy ways of moving through it and moving forward. And I think that this is something that we can also help others with. When you were talking about, helping kids, I was thinking, here we are living intergenerationally, many of us, and what we have are also differences of opinions under the same roof. Mm-hmm. We have different ways of approaching things, and would that every family had been on the same page when this happened and continued on the same page. And I'm not even talking about politics. I'm just talking about whether you go to a restaurant, whether you wear your mask. I mean, there were so many things that are addressing each of our own choices that I think one of the things that can happen during COVID is that each of us can find out really who we are and how we're going to go forward with what's important to us, and really go to our very basic, our essence of, these are my values. This is how I present myself as a person who lives those values, and kind of dealing with everybody else who I'm butting heads with. That's something I need to do, but let me be secure. Let me be, to use your word, grounded. Let me flourish in my own place. Let me nurture myself so that I have what it takes to be able to live in the way that I feel makes me feel safe and secure, whole and healthy. And if it's turning off the news and taking a warm bath and then listening to some beautiful music and getting devices, that are pinging and dinging outside of your bedroom on a regular basis, if it's writing what you're grateful for, I mean, better than I, the research in gratitude, and just paying attention to that which we are grateful for in the most difficult times, to savoring, as you said, noticing the flower and smelling it and noticing the subway grate, but really noticing and allowing your senses to take over and to take center stage, because they really can be so healing as we go through this period, however long this period is going to be. And I think that it's so important for all of us to be able to support others in living healthy lifestyles. It used to be that if one person in the family decided they wanted to lose weight, everybody would make it really hard for them because the family menu would change and people would feel deprived. And now I think the issue is, how can we as a family, really connect? How can we learn about our family history? How can we learn who we are? What stories can we try to engage with grandparents who we may not see, but really want to document their stories? We have time to do that. How can we learn about our teachers' lives and, as parents, be available for our teachers? How can teachers be open enough to one another to share their vulnerabilities and be able to really provide the kind of support that we need from one another to talk about where we feel we're not doing well with this new kind of teaching, or this, caring for our own families and feeling like we're constantly putting out fires. To be real, to be vulnerable. I think that hopefully, if COVID is teaching us that, and that can remain part of what we take with us as we go through this, that would be almost miraculous, because we would become more connected as families, as communities, as workplace colleagues. And I think that's what we need, just as we move forward, not the divisiveness, not I'm right, you're wrong. This is right for me. It may not be right for you, but I need to feel strong enough that I say, this is what I need to do. I can't do that right now.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dale. That's so true. A sense of meaning and values that this time is of course such a large challenge to that, but also an opportunity that can be cultivated. We know that many individuals lives have changed from this. I think of people who have had loss, whether that be loss of a career, or loss of a loved one. There's a great deal of change and meaning. One's life may have been defined by something that is they no longer have access to, and won't be able to. And we've seen that in our experience from people who really enjoyed their livelihood, their job, that they now can't go back to, and don't know when they can go to a similar one. It challenges their sense of their personal meaning to the point of people having lost a loved one that they couldn't even say goodbye to in person. And how do they move forward with processing that loss and grieving? Like you mentioned, writing, and we know also that writing is a very effective tool. We can write about what's meaningful to us over a series of days, even just 10 to 15 minutes of free form writing about personal meaning can help clarify for us what directions we want to go in, but also actually be a healer. We know that writing over a number of days reduces physical stress, it reduces anxiety and depression, it reduces difficult immunological responding, and other forms of physiological stress, cortisol responses. So writing can be very effective if done in a way that's anchoring and meaning-based. So writing about ways, and this way, free-form writing is very helpful. Allowing yourself to sit, even if you say, I'm just going to sit for this 10 minutes and I only write 2 words, doing that over a repeated amount of time can be helpful for gaining that clarity, allowing one to process through some of what the loss has been about and what might be possible given contextual challenges. What do I feel within those? What feels meaningful to me? And much of what comes out of that meaning often are relationships, and many types of relationships, romantic relationships, family, parental, child, but work relationships too. We talk a lot with our clients about what is the kind of environment one wants to be in work, even given this time. And it's amazing what can be possible, even just like this. Dale and I never met in person, but here we are, and sharing together. And there's something about, now there are challenges to this. We're doing some of our sessions are people have to be outside. They can't be in the home. They have to find a protected place, but it's not always just like this. And it can be challenging, but it also, one thing that this kind of environment does is that it focuses your attention. We're focused on each other in a way that we might not normally be. And there is an intimacy to that. It's not, and I like how you mentioned this sort of virtual hug idea, that we can hug each other and we know that hormones that reflect anchoring and grounding, oxytocin and these type of hormones are reflected not just in a hug and in actual physical contact, but also just in contact over a phone or over video. And those are findings that have been shown before COVID, and they apply here, that you can have that kind of experience even through here. And I imagine that is also true for even educational experiences, that we can have a different kind of relationship with our pupils, and that we might not have, but does challenge us, but also provides potential opportunities in terms of attention.
It's so true. When you were speaking about loss before, I was thinking of the importance of ritual, and how so many of family rituals when someone dies are just unable to be practiced. However, there are other rituals that people have developed during this time. And, having who would have ever thought, having a COVID experience virtual funeral, or where you can visit someone in their home to pay respects, it would have been crazy. Yet at the same time, we have people who wouldn't have been able to be there in person, who are there from all over the world. And we have people who, like you said, there's one frame, the one person and another person. So you can really hear what someone has to say, and you can hear stories about the person who died. Am I saying this is as good? Of course not. Am I saying that if we expand our acceptance of what is, and try to focus on those things that can be positive, that can contribute to a release of oxytocin, that can have a flood of endorphins, that really can make us feel connected, because it's all about staying connected. And the big fear early on, and big risk for many, many people who have mental health issues, is the disconnection and the loneliness, and the not having access to the routine to keep them mentally healthy. What I'm saying is that we mustn't throw the whole thing away and say there's nothing good here. There's a lot good here. I've heard from so many people who are practicing their religious services online, and they're finding a connection with a community that they may not have ever felt connected with before, because they were sitting in a pew and looking at, pardon me, the altar, and maybe they said hello, or, whatever they said to the person sitting next to them. But now they're seeing the people, and someone says, my husband came out of the hospital and I'm so happy. So you have a connection in ways to a community that you might not have had before. So I think ritual is really important, whether you've lost a job, whether you've lost a loved one. How can you, I mean, we just finished celebrating holidays, and my mother recently passed away, but just before COVID. And I set the table with her china, and I used, I wore her bracelet. And these are things that I might have done had she been here, but I did them with a different feeling to make sure that connection was going to be ensured. And I think that when we light a candle for someone, when we tell a story about someone, we focus on their presence. As I said this before, their presence in their absence. It's sad, but it can also be joyful, because if we do this, and I guess this is also a metaphor for everything having to do with resilience, everything that's happening to us becomes part of our fabric. We cannot say, oh, I can't wait to forget about this. No. How do we integrate it? How do we make it part of our weave? Do we make the bad stuff, the difficult stuff, a prominent color? Or is it part of the weave and we try to modulate and keep it somewhat in balance? It will change in time, but I know we need to now go to the participants and answer their questions, but I just want to tell you how much I'm enjoying talking with you about these things and having this flow.
Absolutely, me too, Dale. It's so many important points brought up there, and I think I imagine these will be reflected in the questions as well. Just the importance of this kind of personal meaning and taking action in that way with yourself and your community, and those who are challenged in that way and in community, what can be done. So let's go to some of these questions here. I think there's some important ones here. And do you have any tips for avoiding negative thoughts and focusing on positive things during this time when the 24-hour news cycle is so depressing?
Do you want to go first? This is like a seminar.
Sure. Absolutely. So I think first is, and as Dale mentioned, first is sort of a choice about what you do with your behavior. Placing limits on things that the same way you would, with you have cookies in the house. Maybe you're not. If you want to have a balance of how many cookies you have, you make choices about how much to have in your home. Same thing with media. You make choices about how much media to have in your home. And it's important to understand that media does both things. First, it manages our anxiety. We think that if we're gonna get information from it that will give us certainty. And sometimes media, it's confusing, because sometimes media is helpful and a lot of times it's not. A lot of times, because of the 24-hour news cycle, it also may have other information that can be that actually can increase a sense of uncertainty. But for a part, we're looking for a sense of grounding and from things that make us anxious, but we also are looking for a reward. In a sense, it's like the cookie sometimes, that we feel, in a sense, we connect to the world that way. We feel part of something. So there are these good reasons for wanting to go to media and do these things, but it then can get us caught. And that's true for a lot of things. Is also eating too much, eating the kinds of foods that maybe make us sick or that we feel bad about. I've had clients that are turning to drinking a lot. Drinking makes them feel good. They don't feel as good now. Using drugs. All these things are meant to be bombs to these moments that are difficult. And so the first bit is making choices behaviorally, holding out that substance, or metaphorically holding out your phone and saying, what am I opening this up for? What's the purpose? Am I trying to feel less anxious, more grounded? Am I trying to get excited? The same is true with a cigarette. Am I smoking to feel calmer because I feel stressed, or am I smoking because I feel bored or I want something, or is it both? I with my clients, I often use a matrix example. If you remember that old movie, are you a blue pill or red pill, or am I not sure? It's a green pill, but hold it out, metaphorically hold out the choice of what this is. And as Dale talked about, bring intentionality to what that is, and making choices behaviorally about what you want to do about them. It's okay to have it's not like one thing is bad. It's not, news isn't bad. Eating, sweets isn't bad. It's a question of balance and what the right balance is for you. So it's really the intentionality. What intentions do you want with that, and how do you realize those intentions? And of course, that becomes hard in really hard moments. And so using skills as we've discussed becomes important. The first one is just detecting cues. We don't always know that we're in an emotional moment. And we use a metaphor in our treatment called the snowball metaphor, that emotions kind of start at the top of a hill. They're sort of the snowball at the top of the hill is fluffy and soft, and as it rolls down the hill, it picks up sticks and rocks and stones. It gets hard. So we're trying to get better at capturing our emotions at the top of the hill, and that's not always easy. So what's a cue? What's a bodily cue? What's something you notice about when you're in those emotions? I have one client that wants to punch things when they're in that, and so what's the feeling of the punch? What's the feeling of feeling shortness of breath? What might it be? Maybe it's I go to a certain place. Maybe it's my mind gets busy. Use that cue as a signal to stop the snowball a little bit, to catch it at least, and start influencing its direction. And that is in some of the practices that Dale and I are talking about. Noticing first, just bodily, it's easiest to draw your attention. Attention is the easiest thing we can do. We can draw it to our body, draw it to other places, and can create more flexibility and attention, more pliance. And we always can do that starting with the breath and taking deep breaths and noticing our body and our body response, noticing the environment, our self-environment, maybe even try to hear something, and then see if you can hear a little bit further and sort of really see what our environment is fully in all parts, allowing hard things, sitting and holding two hard things. We talked about kind of a critic or something that feels bad and something that maybe feels more grounding. Don't try to push the bad thing out, maybe holding both those pieces, creating a little space for them, maybe represent them as we talked about, like with the inside out example. They could be hanging on a tree. We've had clients throw things on walls like colors. We've used the car metaphor. Let's put some of those critics in the back seat. Let's have our motivations where we want to be in the front seat. And then, compassion, a sense of having one of those percepts show up, be someone who anchors us and remembers things that we've done, things that we have buy-in for, we believe it, not Pollyanna kind of statements, but things that we can believe, even if it's not 100% belief, 51%, maybe we can act on that. We can test it and see. Dale, did you?
Yes, I love what you said, and I support it 100%. I think the other thing is that we can employ techniques and kind of bookend before and after watching the news. And, we can take our breath, we can visualize, we can calm our body, we can do a tension and release, really, really tense your body and then release it. When you feel yourself getting really revved up, when you start screaming at the television, it's probably a good sign that you might want to calm it down. It doesn't mean you're less invested, and it doesn't mean you're less involved. It means that you're probably going to be less stressed and probably a little bit healthy to be able to process the breadth of what it is you're trying to understand when watching the news. So I think that that's important. The other thing is, I think with some people, I encourage them to set a time, to set whatever their routine is in their day, whatever their schedule is, to set a time when it's healthy for them to listen to the news and the type of news that they're listening to. There are many people that I've come in contact with who have actually stopped watching visual news and have restarted reading the newspaper. And because they find that it's just too much overstimulation with people screaming at each other, and it really is too agitating. And it's not productive for them. It's not healthy. So they've toned it down, and they may just watch, if they do, visual and auditory representations of the news, maybe a couple of times a week or a couple of times. It's again, they're what works for them, but they never thought they had any control over it. And they never really understood that it really can make a difference. You can still be informed and to pick where you're getting your news. I mean, I think it's also important to try and vary what your news cycle looks like and what your news input looks like. I've never watched as much European newscasters as I have during this now, because we're getting a different perspective, a different view. And I think that's useful, which brings me to how important it is to be able to recognize that each of us has a different perspective. How we deal with another person's perspective that is like ours and that it isn't like ours is very, very connected to our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being. And if we're constantly in a state of fighting and defending, what are we doing to bring ourselves back to a center, to a balanced place where we can watch the news and have it be something that is going to be a healthy experience for us, where we can feel involved and engaged? So it's, as I said, it could be the topic for a whole seminar, but I know we have other questions.
No, that's thank you for that. That's actually ties very closely into the next question about do you foresee any anxiety issues arising when individuals transition from social distancing to re-entering a normal routine, wherever they may be? And I think that the idea that no one holds truth in this way, that this can become divisive. It can be political opinions, but it doesn't have to be. It could be just, what do you mean you went out? Or why aren't you going out? So, everybody, and we look, beliefs help us provide certainty, the heuristics for certainty. If we didn't have beliefs, we would have to recreate experience every time we had a new day. So our beliefs are useful, heuristics are useful, but we don't want to hold on to them tightly. We don't want to, especially interpersonally with others. So we can get caught in what others are telling us, and we might catch ourselves because we seek reassurance. We want to hear from people. Well, is this safe? Or am I okay? Am I doing this right? And that's really natural. And support is so important that it can get confusing about, but support should feel like it's building you up. And in the end, we have a choice. We have a choice to make ourselves about these actions, about what we do, what feels right for us and our family. And we are in different scenarios. If we have children, or if we are in contact with others that have compromised immune systems, there might be different choices to make for access. We also do want to think of community and others, and that it's not just a choice for ourselves, it's a choice for others as well. And what it means to wear masks and do other actions that help protect others. And in that, we also know that we can take actions and choices. During this period, we've seen also a tremendous social movement as well, and being able to engage in something larger and be able to help others and address some of these issues is also something that can be very ameliorative for COVID, which is to take action and change our systems, to try to improve our systems. And as we talked about, there are incredible health disparities in our country, and being able to help communities where there is less focus, and being able to work to change those systems is a really important action that can help ourselves, help others, and help create change. Working with community centers and religious centers, and working with leaders in different communities to help connect those in suffering communities with the right services are also important. And working to change policies becomes important, so we can take action for ourselves, but also for others.
You raise a very essential point, and actually several. And one I want to echo that you mentioned early on, which is, making choices that don't have to be political, but that are different. And with the intergenerational aspect of people living together or living near each other, we have kind of a reverse of parenting, so that we have, adult children insisting that their parents do X, Y, or Z, or don't do X, Y, and Z, and assuming that they can't make any choices on their own, or that they're not thinking. And so they're initially, especially, I think so many adult children were so worried about their parents, who were, the CDC, God love them, decided who was elderly. And, I was kind of elderly all of a sudden. It was like, are you kidding me? So being able to make choices on my own was now going to be influenced by my children's impression of what we should be doing. And I say this laughingly, but it's really very important to understand what different generations' perceptions are of what the other generation needs to do to be safe, challenging those preconceived notions, all right? Challenging what you knew was right is really what's happening now. Because once one generation is sending their kids to school, and then the older generation has to reevaluate whether or not they can have access in the way they did, even if they're distanced and outdoors and wearing masks. If the kids are going to travel teams, whatever it is they're doing, it's constantly changing. And I think that is something intergenerationally in families that we need to be very, not only compassionate to other people, but understand what we're invested in for them and what we're invested in for ourselves and our own safety, and try and have a dialogue where you really are listening to what other people are saying. The other point you're making is so important, and I don't know, maybe it took COVID to really bring this front and center. The inequities in, just mental health accessibility, any health, physical health accessibility in this country it's disgusting. And I think that what we can do is really see, just look at the discrepancies in who's getting so sick and how we are responding to this. And what are we doing, as you say, and I know that Teachers College and other programs are being very visible in training people who are needing to be trained to work in communities that need mental health services and physical health services. But I think what's important is to understand that this is going to take a long time. We have to reevaluate the way we have been providing healthcare and assumptions about who's receiving healthcare or not receiving healthcare, and how can we make what we want to have out there and what people need accessible, given transportation issues, work issues, childcare issues, and really listen to people who are in need of what it is they need. And in training programs, to train people to be sensitive, train people who are from communities to be able to serve within communities that resonate what is needed. This is going to take a long time. This is not going to happen during COVID or after COVID. But maybe, I pray, that because of COVID, more people are going to be alert and aware and really work hard to change these systemic inequalities. And I think that that's one, I hope, of many outcomes of COVID, that train leaves the station and keeps going.
Thank you so much, Dale, for saying all that, and so important. I would just add to also to change maybe our way of thinking. We might have to adapt our treatments and change our way of thinking to serve different communities best, and understand and honor those experiences of racism and discrimination and how they may impact individuals differently, and make sure we work with more globally and with our treatments as well. So all really important points, and we see that both challenges and also opportunities in these experiences. It's been so nice to get a chance to talk to you today, Dale. It's also great just to see how these ideas get reflected in different ways, but really with a lot of common themes.
Thank you. It's been a joy. And, I wish you tremendous success with the research that you're doing and the way you're reaching so many people. The fact that it's so generalizable, we need it now more than ever. And I really, whomever is listening to this and watching this, I really hope that perhaps there was one or two things that you can take away and share with your own communities, and hopefully each of our lives will be made a little bit easier as we go through very challenging times, and that we can, support others and support ourselves. And one thing we didn't really talk about a lot, which I just want to make mention of, is the importance, and you did mention it, the importance of helping others during this time, the importance of doing acts of compassion and kindness and having empathy, because it really does change the world, and it really does change the relationships that we have. It changes our relationship with ourselves, and it is probably one of the best antidotes for anxiety and depression, is helping someone else. And I think that if we can do that in whatever way, we'll get through this a bit better. So thank you for this dialogue, this conversation, and I really appreciated our time together.
I did too. Thank you so much for that, Dale. And thanks everybody for watching. and please do take good care.